Hey everybody, I'm Jesse, Leanne's husband. She doesn't have a voice right now, so she asked me to fill in for her. And today she has a great collection of Americana DIYs for you.
All right, so up first in today's video, we're making some firecrackers. Never guessed that, I'm sure. But I have these two pieces of scrap wood, so I'm sanding them down. I'm not like totally making them smooth. I'm just making sure there's nothing major. Also just kind of cleaning them up a little bit. I'm also going to say that 'tis the time of year where I am outside doing my editing, and I just decided to stay out here for the voiceover. So hopefully the audio is okay and it's not picking up too much outside noise. Okay, so I showed you I have my white Waverly chalk paint, and I painted both of those blocks of wood with that. And then I'm mixing up some crimson paint, that's the color by Waverly, and with a little bit of brown acrylic paint that I had in my stash. And I'm doing the same with the Ocean by Waverly. I'm just taking the red and the blue and making them a little bit more rustic looking, or at least it is in my opinion. And then for one of these blocks, we're going to use some painter's tape and tape off some stripes. And I'm just trying to make that straight all the way around. So you can see I'm using one piece of tape to be my spacer, just to make sure that it's even all the way around. And then for the other one, I'm just taking these little star stickers. Do you remember these? These have been around for forever, pretty much, but you can buy them at the Dollar Tree. And I'm just going to apply these, it doesn't matter the color, on various parts around the other black. So we're going to go ahead and paint our Waverly chalk paint in crimson that I added the brown paint to. We're going to paint our stripes. I did do 2 coats of this, but that's going to just depend on, you know, your situation, what you're painting on, what you're painting with. All of that plays a role in obviously what you want the end product to be. For the other block, we've got I went around and pressed down the star stickers to make sure that they were on there really good. And then we went in with the Oceans by Waverly, and I'm going to give that, once again, I think I did that 2 coats with that as well. I'm not totally sure, but it doesn't matter because you're going to do whatever you need to do. And then once these are, well, I didn't really wait for them to be fully dry. I went ahead and pulled off the painter's tape for the stripes, and then I used a little pick tool. It's like a makeshift like Cricut tool from Dollar Tree to pick off the stars, and you know that's going to chip away a little bit at the paint. My head gets in the way, so it gets blurry here, but I'm just going to work at it, and it does work out pretty good here. Once all of the paint is fully dried on those, I did sand them down, made them a little bit more rustic, but do what you want here. So I know that this would be easier to do with a drill. My husband was like, I can take that outside and drill some holes for you if you want. And I was like, I know, but I want to do it, and I want to kind of show people that you can just do with whatever you've got. So I first started with a little tool that didn't work, and then I grabbed my screwdriver. Now, this might not be taking care of my screwdriver very well, I don't know, but I hammered it down and then twisted it, and I made a little bit of a hole. So there you go. I did it without a power tool. Nothing wrong with power tools, but I was kind of proud of myself that I did it just using what I had right there with me. And then I'm going in with a little bit of antique wax by Waverly and just dry brush that on. And then here I tried what I'm doing here, you can see, but it didn't work. And so I'm like, okay, pull all of that off. I used my finger protectors, and I put a little bit of glue, and I on the end of some jute cord, and I twisted that to get a little bit of a point and make sure everything was together, and then put some hot glue in the hole, and then just kind of pushed that down in. I didn't really even need to use that little tool to push it down in because it had a point, so it just really slid in there really well. Pulled off the excess hot glue, and then I trimmed the, I don't know, is it called a wick on a firecracker? I don't know. I left it a little bit longer, and I like the frayed look of it. And obviously I did that in the other one, and I absolutely love how these came out. I was super pleased. Let me know what you think down below. Yeah, let me know what you think of these. But a great use of some just scrap wood that you may have on hand. For this next DIY, this little star sign came from Hobby Lobby. They have them again this year. They're not very expensive at all, but I bought them at the end of the year last year when they were like 90% off. I Sanded it down, not much. It really took very little effort to get the writing off, and then I did give it a fresh coat of white paint on one side. This side, we're going to just give a nice thick coat of Mod Podge and let that dry. And then I have some scrapbook paper, also from Hobby Lobby, but this was just in my stash. And I did want to make sure that I got the stripes straight. So I was just kind of checking on that. And then I'm using a piece of parchment paper and my mini iron to iron that on. In the past, before I had this little iron, I would use my household iron. Just make sure there's no steam, and it works just fine. But the heat reactivates the Mod Podge and you get a seamless project. And then I just trimmed it off a little bit with my scissors and then went in with some sandpaper to sand off the edges. This typically works really well. It does give a little bit of a rustic look, but you know, I like that look, so that works for me. And I just sanded down each of the edges, and then I like to go in one more time with the iron. It's not necessary, but sometimes I'm afraid with the sanding, just the pulling on it, even though you only sand down, not up, I just like to make sure it's sealed really good. So then I have this little heart in my stash, and to keep it still, I put it on some painter's tape and gave that a coat of Oceans by Waverly. And then I'm using some glue. I'm just brushing it on with my finger because I didn't want it to like ooze out the sides and make a mess, and wipe that on and just put that on the side painted white. I keep hitting my head on the camera, so sorry about that. And then I'm going in with some antique wax by Waverly around the edges on both sides just to kind of highlight that. And then I did like the side pieces and then just across the whole thing as well. But I wanted to highlight specifically all of the edge pieces. And I just like that look, but you don't have to do that. If you don't like that rustic farmhousey look, then just go ahead for a little bit of a cleaner look. There's nothing wrong with that. You just do what you like, but I love how this looks here, and whether your tier tray can be seen from both sides or not, you can change it up when you just change your mind. But I like having both sides done. I think it looks great. So this is a piece that I have previously DIY'd, but this was originally just a sign from the Dollar Tree, and I've taken everything off and sanded it down. So we are going to go ahead and paint this with Waverly chalk paint in the color white on one side. And then on the side that I had previously DIY'd, I just decided to make this the side that we're going to Mod Podge because why not? It just makes it easier. So I'm once again going to just put a good coat of Mod Podge, let that dry, and then I have some paper from my stash that we're going to do the back. That's all we're going to do on this side. We're not going to add anything else, but I just love this rustic paper, and we're going to use some parchment paper and an iron to reactivate the Mod Podge and seal that onto this piece. I think then the piece looks great from the back, and it also, I mean, if you wanted to, you could use that as the front because not everything in our decor has to have an image or a word. Sometimes you just need like background pieces, filler pieces, especially on a tier tray. You know, sometimes you just need like a layering type of piece. So anyways, we trimmed it down, sanded it off, and now we're going to go in with some Waverly chalk paint. No, we're not. We're going to go in with some Waverly antique wax. And I went, as you saw, on the edges, and I do it pretty heavy on the paper, and I love how it came out, especially on that like whiter strip of wood, faux wood image, whatever you want to call it. I love how that came out. And then I am going to antique wax the white side a little bit. And then I have 3 stars from Hobby Lobby. They come in a pack. I just painted them each red, white, and blue. And I'm using some Gorilla Wood glue. I think that's what that is. No. Yes. It's a glue. It's a glue. And I'm just spreading it out with my finger because I didn't want there to be too much on it and to like ooze out of the edges. So you could also use a paintbrush, but my finger was there. It was handy, so that's what I used. And I layered those on, and then I attached them to the white side of this. You could just put the glue in the center. I wanted it to go out a little bit to the tips just to make sure it was on there nicely. But you can also just use some hot glue. But, you know, I got stuff on hand. I might as well use it up, you know? So I did go on back in over the star and just add a little bit more antique wax so that the star wasn't like stark and crisp compared to the rest of it. But that's it for this sign. Here's the back just to show you what that looked like. But once again, I love having these 2-sided signs, especially depending on where you display your tier tray. It's nice to at least make sure the back side is finished. Up next, we're going to use some scrap wood. These are just little blocks. Dollar Tree does have those larger cubes. You could certainly do these in a larger size, but these little mini blocks in my stash were perfect for a tier tray. So I sanded them down, not much. They're still pretty rough, but I smoothed them out, cleaned them up a little bit, and I painted them red, white, and blue. You know, because that's kind of the theme of the video. And then I went ahead, this stencil is from Hobby Lobby. I really like getting stencils at Hobby Lobby. It doesn't have an adhesive or anything, so, you know, my hands got dirty. I just got in there, held it on, and I'm stenciling on some stars in just the opposite colors. So I just figured out what color star I wanted on what color block. Tried to get them even in the center. It was a little bit hard to see, but I think I did just fine. Just make sure you don't have too much paint on your stencil brush because you don't want it to like ooze out underneath, the bleed through on the stencil. That is, you know, that's the culprit. So just don't overload your paintbrush and you should be fine. And then I'm going in with some Antique Wax by Waverly and just doing that a little bit all over the blocks. I'm a broken record, but I like the look. I like the look. If you are enjoying this video, I would appreciate it if you gave this video a thumbs up. That is a very easy way to let me know that you're enjoying my content, but more importantly, lets YouTube know that you're enjoying my content, and that in turn makes them more likely to share my video with others. So if you like this video, if you like budget-friendly DIYs, please give this video a thumbs up and help me out. That is it for these little blocks. I think they're so cute, and like I said, you could do these in any size, whatever you've got on hand, but they're really cute for a tier tray or even just a little shelf filler type of thing as well. So up next we have a rolling pin, and you can get these in so many places. This one already has some red handles on it. A friend sent these to me, but I don't know, you can get them in packs at Hobby Lobby. I've seen them so many places. So we're going to paint the wood part with Mod Podge and let it dry. I was like, can I iron-on method this? I wasn't sure if it was going to work, but you know what? It did. The hardest part here, which is why my head keeps getting in the way, was just getting it started because I wanted to make sure my paper was on there straight. So I just got one little edge there going with my parchment paper and mini iron, and then I began to roll it. It took me a little bit to kind of get into a groove. Don't burn your fingers and just do a little bit at a time. And then I found here, I just kind of started rolling it as I went, and that worked pretty good. So I was pleased. I wasn't sure. I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. This is a scrapbook paper from Hobby Lobby. So the thickness is like thicker than a computer paper, but not thick like a cardstock. When I got to the very edge, I did add a little bit of Mod Podge on the back side of the paper and then rolled that over and ironed that on really, really good. Because it was going to overlap the paper a little bit, so I needed to add a little bit of Mod Podge, and I was pleased that it worked pretty good. Now the tricky part was trimming off the edge of the paper. I probably could have just tried to measure exactly, but I was afraid I would cut it too short. So I used a little nail file, and then here I'm using a scrap piece of sandpaper. It was a little bit of work, but I got it done. And then I'm just, there again, just sealing it in one more time with the iron. So the handles were a little bit too bright of a red. So what I did was go in with some crimson paint by Waverly that I had muted down with some brown paint, painted the handles, and then we're going to take a little bit of antique wax and go over like the edge where the wood is. I didn't want that to just be like a pure wood. It just didn't make sense with like the look of everything else. And then a little bit over the handles, even though the handles already had a little bit of brown in that paint, but I wanted the antique wax on that. And then I did go across all of the paper as well. Just wanted to give that rustic-y look. And this was a fun one, very simple, just paint and some paper, but I love how this one came out. Let me know what you think down below. This sign, plaque, whatever you want to call it, came from the Dollar Tree, and I previously used it. I do make over a lot of my DIYs. I'll use them for a little while in my home and then just redo them because I make so many because of my channel, so I don't, need all that decor. Anyways, I took some lightweight spackling from the Dollar Tree, filled in the holes, and I'm also sanding off a little bit of that paint that came around the backside. But let the spackling dry and then sand it down, and you'll never know you had the holes. Now, if you don't want to make this a leaning sign, you can certainly leave those holes and put some twine in there. I think it came with twine. And anyways, now we're going to get this coat of white paint, and then I'm going to paint the back side as well. This ended up, I changed my mind on the color I was going with this. So I ended up going back in with some crimson paint by Waverly, and you can see I left it a little bit rustic. I didn't cover it fully. And I started trying to use these stickers from from Dollar Tree, and they were just too big. Didn't work. And when I pulled them off, it pulled off a little bit of the paint, but I liked it. It was chippy paint, so I didn't touch it up. So these stickers, both sizes here, are from, I don't know, probably Hobby Lobby that I got on clearance at some point, but Dollar Tree does have different size stickers. This, I needed a little apostrophe, so there was an asterisk in one of the packs, and I just trimmed it down and made myself an apostrophe. So you'll see what it says in just a second. I got these little mini wood pieces from Hobby Lobby. They're like $2.49. Right now it's all 40% off. So a great buy, lots of different patterns. I pulled out these little Uncle Sam hats, and I'm painting them with Ocean by Waverly, but I'm not going to go super heavy. And here I am with a baby wipe wiping it off a little bit. I wanted it to be a little bit more rustic, and I didn't care if you could see like the lines through that were like printed on there. And now we're going to attach these to our sign. I found a saying on something somewhere that said party like it's 1776, and I thought it was so cute. So I'm taking some hot glue and I'm attaching these little hats onto the sign. And then I wanted to do a little bit more embellishment. Well, wait, first, before we embellish, we're going to add in some antique wax. I wanted to dull down the stickers a little bit and then just also keep with the theme of all of the other DIYs that I was doing, and you know, make it a little bit more rustic. So I want to make a little bit of a bow. So I have this lace from the Dollar Tree, this star ribbon, I believe that was from Hobby Lobby, and then some jute twine, some thicker jute twine, and we're going to make ourselves a little bit of a messy bow, crisscross bow, whatever you want to call it, making little X's of them, and then we're going to tie it in the middle with a piece of jute twine. Now this sign that I'm making is just going to be leaning up against something on the tiered tray, but if you would like it to stand, you could certainly put a like jingle block on the back to help it stand up, but I didn't worry about it for this purpose. So I'm putting a little dot of glue before I do one more knot on the bow just to make sure it's secure. That's probably not necessary, but it was, my hot glue gun was there, it was all warmed up. So now we're going to trim down the bow. I ended up trimming it down quite a few times. I'm fraying the jute cord, jute twine, whatever you want to call it. And I really just went into my stash. I didn't plan this and was like, what goes? So I am going to hot glue that to the top of this. And then I did go in with some antique wax across the ribbon on like the blue ribbon as well as the lace ribbon. I just wanted to make it look old. I had a little tiny wood star in my stash, and so I put some antique wax on that as well, and then glued that to the center of the bow. I thought the bow was kind of fun, whimsical yet rustic, and went with the, you know, party theme of this sign. So I love how this one came out. Let me know what you think down below. And yeah, this was a really, really fun one. I had a hard time finding like the stickers for the right size I needed, but it was so fun when I finally got it done. All right, so I wanted to make a beaded garland for my tiered tray. Actually, you'll see where I display it, but you could definitely put it on a tiered tray. And I had these beads from a beaded garland from the Dollar Tree, and I was like, I'll probably never use these colors. So I was like, I wonder if I can sand them down and that'll be easier to paint. You can. This was a little bit tedious. I tried all different ways of doing it, but I don't know. Maybe it's not necessary. I thought maybe it would take less coats of paint if I did it that way. So I thought I'd show you my little creative thought process. And then I'm going to just put them on a wooden skewer to paint them. You can also put them in a plastic bag with paint, a container, roll them around. There's lots of ways to get paint on your beads. Also, you can buy colored beads. Anyways, you can just paint plain wood beads. This is what I did though. So I painted some in red and some in blue, and then you're going to see I had some plain wood beads in my stash as well as some beads that were white, and we're going to use all of those. Then I also had these wood tags in my stash, and I'm going to paint both sides of them I'm going to paint one in red and one in blue. Lots of repetition here, but you know, it's the nature of the theme DIYs. So once again, I have these little mini wood pieces from Hobby Lobby. I painted one of the USA. I didn't do a lot of paint because I wanted the details that were like engraved in there to come out. And then I did one of the firecrackers. I ended up not using the USA because I only ended up needing one once I decided how to put this thing together, because at first I wasn't totally sure. So I'll use the USA piece in the future. And so I'm going to use this Gorilla wood glue or Gorilla household glue and attach the wood tags at an angle so they're overlapping. I made sure the holes were lined up because that is going to be important when assembling our beaded garland. And I wanted to keep moving, so I used these mini clamps from the Dollar Tree to hold it together while I did other things. Once again, a little bit more glue, and we're going to attach the firecracker onto the top of the wood tag. We're going to let that dry, and then we're going to go back to our beads. And because this is what I do, we're going to add antique wax on these as well, just to, you know, make them look old. And then here are the other beads I chose. I did some white beads and then some wood square beads from the Dollar Tree. And I just dabbed some of it on and rolled it around in a paper towel. I wasn't going for perfect. I didn't want them all to be the same. But then to keep with it, I needed to add some antique wax to the tags as well. Now we're going to begin threading these on some jute twine. I tried doing it without taping the end, but that was a nightmare. So a little bit of painter's tape, it made a little bit of a point like a needle, and threaded it through. I just made up a pattern that I liked. Okay, you do what you like. I liked having a square one in there. I thought that was kind of a nice switch up. And then I'm going to attach this to the bottom. I like to double knot that on the tag, and then let's see, we're going to double knot it. I tried to speed it up because I didn't want it to be too long, but I also wanted you to see how I did it. And then I cut the end off, and we're just going to thread that up through a bead. Just I don't know, it feels like an added security. Trim that down, and then I have a jute tassel that I previously made, but there's lots of videos out there if you need help with making them. And we're going to tie this on. Now on this end, I'm wanting it to be a little bit tighter because it's the end. I want the beads to all be next to each other. So we're going to double knot that, and then I'm going to once again thread that up through a couple. I think I did like 2 beads this time, but it doesn't really matter. You don't necessarily have to do that step. You could also just add a dab of like hot glue, but I love how this one came out. I'm just showing it to you here at a table, but you'll see that I did put on a mini blanket ladder that I have in my kitchen next to my tier tray, but it would be cute on a tier tray itself. I have this pack of wood stars. I think this is from Hobby Lobby. They come in different sizes, but you could also just print one off or freehand it. But I'm just using this to trace it out on some cardboard. This is a very thin cardboard. It's actually like the insert that comes on like a calendar, when you buy a calendar. So I like it because it's a little bit flexible. I also liked it because I already had it on hand. This DIY is super, super budget friendly. So I ended up doing, I think, a total of 8 of these. I'm not going to show those all to you, but we're going to cut it out. The flexible cardboard makes it easy to kind of just like get into all of the curves and whatnot. So here we go. I think I only have 5 here, but I ended up doing more than that altogether. And then I went through my stash and I was like, what do I have? We're going for some neutral patriotic DIYs. So I picked out some different yarn or twine that I had. I think that yarn is a little bit easier because it is thicker, but it can be expensive. So I just went with what I had on hand, and I recommend using finger protectors. I burnt myself several times during this process. So getting around the points is a little bit tricky, but we're just going to wrap them around. I started out by just taping the first piece because my hot glue gun wasn't quite ready yet, but then I'm going in with some hot glue. Ideally, you don't use a ton of hot glue, but to keep it around the points, I kind of had to. And so what you want to do is just twist and wrap and twist and wrap. I like to make sure that it looks good on both sides of the piece. I did do these previously for Valentine's Day with some hearts, but I thought it'd be fun again to do for the patriotic season. And I do a lot of red, white, and blue, but sometimes it's fun to, mix in some neutrals. So you're gonna just do every which way. I like it to be, like, I kind of have to go in the same direction at times to cover like the tips, but then I like to mix it up by going a little bit crisscrossy. Crisscrossy, is that a word? This is dangerous, but I did it and didn't have a problem. But everything here is flammable, including the cardboard underneath. But I just was burning up some of the fuzzies. And the other upside to when you're doing this is you don't have to have every star or shape doesn't need to be perfect, because you're going to be wrapping it with yarn, so you can kind of add to areas if you need to. But I just chose 3 colors, and if you just use stuff that you already kind of have on hand, this can be an incredibly budget-friendly DIY. And I just piled these into a galvanized truck that I have in my decor, and I love how this came out. I thought it was just a fun little subtle nod to the patriotic season. Up next, we're going to make a banner. So I have these wood banner pieces. I think you can pick these up at like Hobby Lobby or any craft store. We're going to go in with some Waverly Antique wax, and I am brushing it on. Clearly professional work here. But we're going to brush that on, and then I'm going to wipe it off with a baby wipe or with a paper towel, but you can also use a baby wipe, however you want to do this. And I did both sides, even though you're really only going to be able to see one side, but I wanted it, the whole thing to be finished. I'm putting a little bit of Mod Podge here, only in the center, because we're going to stencil, and I wasn't sure if that would help with any possible bleed through because of the antique wax. I wasn't sure, so that's what I did. And then I have these stencils. I want to say I picked them up from Walmart. I'm not sure. I've had them for a long time. They are adhesive, although there's probably a way for me to get the fuzzies off the back. They're not as adhesive friendly as they used to be. And they moved around a little bit with the antique wax, but we made it work. I also think I put the S on upside down. So oops, maybe you wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't pointed it out, but I'm going to hold them in place so they don't shift on me. And I'm using a pouncer brush and some white acrylic paint. And just don't go too heavy on the paint, because then you're more likely to have some bleed through there underneath the stencil. So we're gonna go and do USA, and then here's the reveal. It came out pretty good. I'm showing you, I am wiping that with a baby wipe or a wet paper towel or something, like immediately. And then I did go in, my head's in the way, but I filled in the gap in the A. That's just how the stencil was, and I didn't want it to have that gap. And then on the other 2 pieces, we're just going to stencil on a star. This is a star stencil that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. And once again, don't do too much paint. I should have taped off some of those little stars, because I was trying so hard to not get paint in those little stars that it was a little bit of a challenge. If I just covered them up with some painter's tape, that would have been a little bit easier. I thought 2 stars would be nice because we're going to have one on either side of the USA, but you can do any phrase or word or design, obviously, that you want. I am going to go in and seal this with some Mod Podge. I don't know if it was necessary. Well, it was mostly necessary because I'd only put Mod Podge on a little bit of it, like the center where I was going to be painting in the beginning, so it didn't all have like the same finish. So I probably didn't need to seal the paint in that much, but anyways, I'm showing you, I'm just using a little wooden skewer to clean out the Mod Podge so it didn't goop up in the hole. Once that was fully dried, we're going to make our little banner. So I have some of this beige and white twine that I picked up from the Dollar Tree. And then I also have some tassels that I've previously made from them. I have a bunch of tassels that I've used in other DIYs that I've just saved. And so I pulled some out, and I just put some painter's tape on the edge to kind of make like a needle to make the threading of this easier. And I'm going to do a tassel in between each banner piece. And I am choosing what I'm using here is a little hook to open up that tassel. You wouldn't have to do that. If you make the tassels as you go, you wouldn't have to worry about it. I decided to thread so the string was in front on the banner, but you could also do it from behind, depending on what look you like. I think I just poked myself there. We're going to thread this together with as many tassels as you want, as few as you want. You could also add some beads in there. And here I have it just displayed on an old roll top desk. I think I'm actually going to move it in my decor to the front area of my house, but this worked perfect to display it for you. And I love how this one came out. Up next, we're going to use this metal board. This was actually a clipboard that I used took the screws out and took the clip part off the top. You can see where the holes are on the side there. I elevated this on some cans of paint just so that I could do the sides and everything and not have it, flat on a surface. So I actually do that for the whole part of this DIY. What I mean by that is I had it raised on some paint bottles the whole time. So I'm going to give this a good coat of Mod Podge to start because I thought that the paint would adhere better if I put Mod Podge, just because paint and metal don't always adhere very well. And then I'm going in with Waverly chalk paint in the color Snow White. We're going to put a good coat. It's not like a perfect coat, but it's also not like a rough coat. I did go for full coverage, but I only did one coat, so it's pretty thin, but it's okay because we're going to be adding some more to this on top of the white. If you're enjoying this video, please give it a thumbs up. That helps me out so much. It lets YouTube know that you enjoy my content and makes them more likely to share my content with others. So of course that helps me out. So giving the video a thumbs up and leaving me a comment down below, all of those forms of engagement help me out so much. Once my paint is fully dry, we're going to go in with some antique wax once again, and I'm just going to brush this on. I'm going to give a pretty good coat, and I'm going to do the whole thing before I wipe any of it back because I'm not really trying to wipe off a lot of it. And I don't mind brush strokes here. I'm trying to get a full coverage, but I'm okay with, I don't know, you'll just have to see, I guess, how it comes out in the end. So I'm wiping it off now with just a paper towel. And once again, I have this kind of elevated on some bottles of paint, just kind of made it a little bit easier. It was moving around on me, but it did make it easier to get to all of the edges because it's a super flat piece. So, well, you'll see it how it looks. See, I've got some stickers. These are ones I picked up on clearance from Hobby Lobby. But you can see the brush strokes and like kind of the start and stop of the brush. It kind of looks a little bit like wood grain to me. I don't know. Let me know what you think. But I do like how this came out. And now I'm just trying to figure out exactly where I want to place my letters. I tried to like center it, but then not all letters are like the same width. And so some of them I ended up having to move them. But I'm using a little pair of tweezers, just a little tip for you that helps a lot when you are trying to place stickers. I find that works really, really, I don't know, I think it works really well for placing down the stickers. I like the font of these stickers because it's kind of like, they're not perfect. It's a little bit more, reminds me of the font that I've seen on called Comic Sans or whatever. I don't know. So I'm just pulling out another form of a ruler, and we're gonna move these around. But the tweezers is really nice. And if you noticed, the stickers will not stick well to antique wax, but I also didn't push them down all the way. I just kind of pushed them down at the bottom because I wanted it to be easy for me to move these. So we're gonna get our stickers in place where we want, and I'm just writing, as you can see, America. And I'm just making sure that there's about the same amount on each side, and now we're placing our stickers down. So I have these other stickers, which I think were also probably from Hobby Lobby at some point. I don't know, I typically pick up stickers when they're on sale or on clearance, as these ones were and the last ones. And I'm just, once again, trying to get them straight at the bottom, and I put established 1776. And then I've got my star stencil from Hobby Lobby, and I'm just trying to make sure the star is centered. And this time I did decide to tape off the extra star so I didn't have to worry about it. And we're stenciling in a little white star at the top. It's better to do a couple of coats rather than do too much paint at once when you're stenciling. So if you have to go over it a couple times, that's better than putting too much at first. So as you can see, these stickers are not super staying straight because of the antique wax. So I knew I was going to need to Mod Podge these stickers anyway. So I've got some matte finish Mod Podge, and I'm being very gentle as I'm going over the stickers because I knew that they were likely to shift on me a little bit. And some of them I even lifted them up just a tiny bit and put a little Mod Podge underneath them because, like I said, they're just not sticking well with the antique wax. But with the Mod Podge, they ended up sticking just fine. Just getting a couple Mod Podge clumps out of there. But I gave that a nice good coat, and I did go around the edges because I didn't want any paint or anything to chip off the edges since it was metal. And then I'm going in, I got this huge giant thing of jute. This was brand new, still in the packaging from Hobby Lobby, but I got it at a thrift store for like $6. So I'll be using this for the rest of my life. And I just wanted to put some detail around the edges. I also wanted an easy way to cover up those holes where the clipboard pieces had been. So I used a thicker part of the twine of the jute because you know how some pieces are just a little bit bulkier if you've used jute at all. So I used some of the fatter sections to cover that. And then I'm just using some hot glue to attach this around the perimeter. Now, hot glue and metal aren't an excellent pair because the metal causes the hot glue to cool quickly. So as you can see, I'm doing just little sections at a time. And it's holding just fine. If I wanted to, I could definitely go around and like pull it off of the sign, but it's holding absolutely fine. So let me know what you think of this one. I was happy how this one came out. I like the different fonts. I like just the subtle little details in this neutral sign. Up next, I have this little star sign. This was picked up from Hobby Lobby last year on clearance. I paid maybe 20 cents for it. I love to pick up after season clearance. It is the way to go. And if I'm just going to make it over, I don't really care half the time what it looks for. I'm just looking at the general shape and material. So I'm just going to go in. This was really easy to sand down. I sanded off where the sticker had been and I sanded off the writing just so that it would cover a little bit better. And I'm just going in with some Waverly chalk paint in the color white. I just wanted to kind of give it a crisp, clean look. So obviously nothing drastic here. And then once that was fully coated, I did the whole thing, like the edges and everything too, just because it was a little scuffed up. I'm using some washi tape just because it is a different thickness than painter's tape. My head gets in the way a lot, so I'm not able to show you a lot of this, but you get the idea. I'm using the tape to create the spacers and we're making some stripes. So I don't think I pushed this down very good because I did have a decent amount of bleed through and I use washi tape a lot and don't have a problem, but it's okay. We cleaned it up. So I'm going in with some antique wax by Waverly and then just one thin coat. And then I'm going to peel off all of our little pieces of tape and you're going to reveal your stripes. I did these stripes just perfectly like horizontal. I didn't want them on an angle because I was, resembling the stripes on a flag. But you can see the bleed through here. I'm not really sure. I just think I was moving too quickly and didn't put the washi tape down super great. But despite the fact that my head is in the way, I am using a tiny little paintbrush to just clean up the edges a little bit. I didn't make it perfect because these are definitely more rustic DIYs, but I did want to clean it up a bit. If you are new to my channel, I would love it if you would consider subscribing. If you're not familiar with YouTube and how it works, there's a subscribe button. It costs you nothing. Just click on that. If it still says subscribe, then you're not subscribed, because if you were, it would say subscribed. So just subscribe. That helps YouTube know that you want to see more of my videos. It helps me out, and then make sure that you don't miss out on my future videos. I did clean up the edges a little bit of on the star with a little bit of white paint as well. And then I'm just wrapping a little bit of jute twine and tying it in a knot. I didn't do a bow or anything. I just wanted a little subtle, simple addition here, just a little detail. And it's probably wise to use the lighter to burn off the fuzzies before you attach it to items, but sometimes I act quickly and not always with wisdom while I'm crafting. So use with caution. But that's how this one came out. I thought it was just the twine was just a nice little subtle touch, and it kind of coordinated with the other DIYs. To start out this project, we're going to need some letters. I am not sure where that tag is from, if I picked this up from Hobby Lobby on clearance last year, or if I just picked this up from the Dollar Tree. I honestly am not sure, but you can find these signs, and you can also just pick up letters at Walmart or Hobby Lobby. They've got them. We're going to pull it off of this burlap ribbon, I guess you could say, and I'm just pulling out the staples. I am going to save this burlap ribbon, for lack of a better word, and can use that at some other point. We're going to sand this down. We got some glitter here, and we're going to sand that down. But then when I got to the S, I was like, oh, this paper just wants to peel off. So it came out pretty well, but either way, I sanded it down to peeled off paper where it would peel off. We're not going to make this perfect because we are going to cover it. So I'm putting a very thick coat of Mod Podge on each of these letters. It is a like MDF type of material, so it is really soaking it up. We're gonna do the iron-on method, so we're gonna let it dry. So I made sure to do a really thick coat because I didn't want it all to just soak into the material. So a thick coat of Mod Podge of any kind, and then let that dry. I picked up this paper from Hobby Lobby this year, and I'm going to just cut out pieces in the approximate size for each letter, and then we're going to iron that on. I'm just putting a piece of parchment paper, and I have my mini heat press from HTV Ront. These are very handy, but if you don't have one, you can use a household iron. I did that for a long time until I got this one. And just make sure you don't have any steam. And just go really slowly over it. Now this part is sped up. At first I showed you it in regular speed. Making sure to cover the edges really good. And then we're going to trim this down a little bit, get off some of the excess with some scissors, and I'm getting into all of the nooks and crannies here. I'm going to show you how I do this. To get the clean edge, we're going to use sandpaper or a sanding block, but we're going to use a couple of different tools. So first, just sand away, sand down so that you're not pulling the paper up from the surface, and just go gentle. This is real speed here, so I just wanted to show you, like, we're not going to go crazy with it. And at times it might look like I'm going up and down, but I'm not. So in between here, I'm going in with an emery board. That helped. So it looks like I'm going back and forth, but I'm not. I am lifting up and just going down. Then lifting up, going down. And then for the little corner in the U, I went in with a piece of sandpaper and folded it. And with the A, I had to get really creative, but I didn't show you all of that. I'm just showing you it here. I just wanted to show you kind of how you go about doing that. You could also, if you have a really good sharp, like a cutting knife, maybe you could trim the edges there. But I just feel like the sandpaper, sanding it down is like my favorite method. I just had to get creative to get in all of the corners. And then I noticed that a couple spots in the edges, probably just from all of the pressure, came up again. So I just went back with, and I might have done it while it was still warm and that was part of it, but with the iron, and you can see it's all sealed down perfectly. And then I'm taking this sign. This was from the Dollar General, a Valentine's sign, $1. I know I paid less than that. I went and picked stuff up on clearance afterwards, so maybe 20 cents. Taking off the hanger, I'm using my heat gun to help take off the adhesive for the sticker. And then there's this weird like glitter spot like glued on that just happened probably, you know, I don't know, when it was being manufactured, an error happened here. So I'm just going to sand that off. I sand down the spot where the label was a little bit and just smooth this out. We are going to use the back as our front. So I'm going to give this a coat of Waverly chalk paint in the color, I believe it's Snow White. And I'm doing a really good coat, but I'm okay if there is a little bit of edges shown of that MDF board, because that just lends to the more rustic look, I guess you could say. So we're just going to get a good coat of that. And then once that was dry, I am going to just sand down the edges just a little bit. I sanded down the front to smooth it down, but that didn't really take off any paint. But I did want to bring out some of the edges a little bit. You can see I also painted over the edges just a touch. So I'm just trying to bring out a little bit of that MDF look. And for the front, I wanted to cover this really well. So the front is now the back. So I'm once again going in with a thick coat of Mod Podge. I wanted to do this before I attach stuff to the front, because then it would be not like a flat surface. I'm once again using the iron-on method, so I let the Mod Podge dry, and then I'm covering it. You can use craft paper. This is actually like the center of a wrapping paper roll, so it's a little bit stiffer and thicker, but I'm going to get a really nice coverage here. It's going to just look so completed and finished. There's one little spot where you can see the white sign come through that I didn't quite line it up right, but it's really not that noticeable. And then once again, using my sanding block to sand away and get the edges smoothed out there. So for some embellishment, I pulled out some beads. I'm just painting them with some brown paint on a wooden skewer. You see them spinning around. You can also throw them in a baggie with some paint. There's all sorts of ways to paint your beads. And this is how I'm doing it. And then I am wiping them down with a paper towel, just because I wanted a little bit of it wiped off, but not like a ton. So it's mostly brown, but a little bit rougher looking. And then I'm going in with a stencil brush and just a little bit of paint, that same brown paint, and I'm highlighting mainly the edges of the sign. And then I'm going to wipe off, so there's a very, very little on my brush, and I'm just going across to make a few little streaks just to give it a little bit more of that rustic feel. Obviously, you don't need to do that if you don't want to. You could even make your beads a color if you want. You know, customize this to your own style. I'm going to go in with more of that brown paint around the edges of each letter. That just kind of helps make them stand out a little bit. And then on some of the grooves, or the like cutouts on some of the letters, it's also going to kind of disguise. You can see here on the letter A, the little cutouts in the center were a little bit rough. It was very hard to sand that, but I made it happen. And it just kind of like cleans that all up and makes everything look purposeful. You know, if there's an error or a mistake, make it purposeful and nobody will ever know. So I like this highlighting the edges. I feel like it just helps it stand out a little bit. So we want to put our hanger. We're going to just use the original hanger back in on this sign. If you have a sign without holes in it, and you could either just glue some twine to the back or just make it a leaning sign with no hanger. But I'm just using a wooden skewer to punch through where the holes are. And then I went back and ironed on where those holes were a little bit because I didn't know if the paper had come away a touch when I was poking the hole through. So just to help it, you know, be a little bit more solid. And then I'm threading the beads onto our hanger and putting that back on. And then for the letters, we're just going to hot glue them. I lined them up and centered them. Sorry, my head always comes in the way here. I did push down quite a bit here because I wanted to make sure they had a full contact, and so I pushed down really hard and held it for just a little bit to let that hot glue settle. And I tried not to put glue on the edges so that I could shift the letter a little bit when I got it down to get it in place. But then anything that oozed out, I did go in with a little tool to just scrape out. You can use a skewer or something while it was still warm, so I didn't have to really scrape up the paint, but just get out any glue that oozed. But I just tried to not put too much towards the edge. Once again, my head's in the way and hitting the camera. And then I wanted to do one little bit of embellishment. So I have this ribbon from Hobby Lobby, and it's not double-sided. So I did the bunny ears, you know, tying your shoe with the bunny ears and flipping that out. And then the center is just blue, but I thought that looked really nice. And I'm just gonna, you know, pull on this until I get to the size I want. Here's what the ribbon looked like. It's from Hobby Lobby. I picked it up on clearance last year, but it's not bad at regular price either. And just going to trim that bow down. And I thought that was a nice little touch, but I really like how this sign comes out. Let me know what you think down below. For this DIY, I had 3 scrap pieces of wood. They are mostly the same length. They're not totally, but they're very close enough for a rustic DIY. So we're just going to sand this down, and I'm not really sanding it super thoroughly. I'm just trying to get any big rough edges off, and then I'm going to use this Gorilla wood glue. I was having a hard time getting it to come out the top. It's probably clogged, so I'm just going to kind of paint this on to our blocks. I really wanted a good adhesive here, and I'm just using like a wooden skewer to spread it out. And we're going to do a little bit of wood glue and a little bit of hot glue. You're supposed to not overlap them, the 2 glues. This is when I realized I thought I had plugged in my hot glue gun, but I hadn't. So I ended up wiping with a baby wipe off the glue while my glue gun heated up, and then I redid the whole thing. Squeeze that together, cleaned out any excess glue, and we're going to do that for all 3 pieces. And what I ended up doing was wrapping it with some painter's tape and then putting something heavy on top because I really didn't want them to separate. I wanted them to have a tight fit. And then we're going to go in with some Waverly chalk paint in the color white. We're going to give this whole thing, I think I just did 1 good coat. I don't think I did a second coat, but we're going to do the front, the side, the back. The end pieces, because they are where the wood is cut, you have to go a little bit heavier with the paint to get the coverage. And then once again, we have this ribbon from Hobby Lobby. We're going to make a little flag sign. And I thought this ribbon would be very cute for these stars. So I know this is not like accurate. This is, you know, flag inspired. So I was kind of gauging where I wanted to do the blue with the stars and where I wanted to do my stripes. I ended up just cutting or measuring off each of my blocks in half for a stripe, and I put some painter's tape down and covered up the edges so that they would stay clean too. And I'm using Waverly chalk paint in the color Crimson. I don't think I showed that to you, but we're going to just make our little stripes. And I did it as I went because my painter's tape, this would be easier if you have different lengths of tape to use as your spacer, but I only have the 1 size tape, so I just was kind of cutting it into pieces. And then I determined how far down my blue ribbon would go. If you don't have the blue ribbon, obviously you can just paint it blue, add on some white stars. But here are my pieces. I cut them all down. I only cut down the 1 edge, and I got that down really good so that it wouldn't fray. So you can see I'm putting some hot glue there. And then we're going to trim off the other side in a second. I really sped this up and I apologize. My head kept getting in the way, but you know, I got to see what I'm doing. There's enough that you can see what I did. Then once I got them all down, I trimmed down the other edge, and my blocks were not exactly the same length, so I just did the best I could. And then I did put some Mod Podge on that end of the ribbon because I was afraid it was going to fray. And then once everything was dry, I went in with some antique wax and a stencil brush, took a lot of the, not much antique wax on my brush, went over, including the ribbon, and just kind of wanted to dull everything down, make it look a little bit more old and weathered. And I do really like how that came out. And now I have this burlap ribbon from a USA sign that I showed you earlier. And I thought this could be a nice little accent piece. So I'm using my mini iron to straighten it out because it had a lot of like twists and turns in it. And I'm putting it in between parchment paper. I don't know if it was necessary, but I didn't want to risk anything getting on my iron. So I am fraying the edges and just trying to get it down to where I need it to be. And we're going to put this all the way around the sign of the flag piece. I didn't do the bottom. I think my sign still would have laid okay flat because it's not very thick, but just to be sure, I didn't put it on the bottom. And I'm using a little silicone spatula from the Dollar Tree to press this down because obviously it's going to come right through. It's a little bit more frayed on one side. I wanted it to look rough and rustic. So we're going to do that all the way around 3 sides. And then I do trim the edges. I'm not making it perfect. I wanted it to hang over the edges a little bit, but not too much. Anyways, this was very simple little touch to add to this. And I really like how this little sign came out. But so yeah, give it a little bit of a trim and a haircut. And I really like this sign. It's small enough to be on a tier tray, but big enough to just use like as a shelf sitter as well. Let me know what you think. For this next DIY, I have one of these flower pots. They're like a seed starting. They're like a natural material. You can actually use them to plant in. I picked these up in a pack from Walmart, but then I have seen them at Dollar Tree as well. And I use them for another project that you can look back on my outdoor DIY video. And I made a wreath with them, but I had a few left over. So we're going to tape off the top, and I'm using Ocean from Waverly chalk paint and putting a good coat here. I just did 1 coat, and I needed to do this whole thing in phases because I needed the paint to dry. So then I taped off where the blue was and made some stripes. Now, with the angle of the pot, these stripes are not even. They're not all of the same. This is definitely more rustic. And I'm just going in with an acrylic paint here. So this just goes to show you can use acrylic or chalk paint. And this material will absorb it. So it's not going to have a super crisp line, okay? It's going to bleed over just a little bit. We're going to go ahead and do some red stripes, but while my white paint was drying so that I could tape them off, I'm going to use a stencil from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to paint on some little white stars. I'm doing some over what will be the red stripes, and then I went back in and used a smaller star, showing you just wiping it off with a baby wipe, and going to do a smaller star on the white stripe spot. You can, do this anyway. This is just inspiration, right? So these pots are really cute, very inexpensive. They're lightweight. You could do this though with like a terracotta pot if you wanted. And then I taped off where I wanted to paint my red stripes. And I did use this opportunity to kind of space them out a little bit more because I knew the red would cover the white pretty good. But once again, this material will absorb the paint, and so it does kind of spread a little bit. So this isn't going to be perfect. It definitely looks a little bit more rustic, but I really like how this came out. And it wasn't hard to do. The painting wasn't long. It took a little bit of time to let everything dry and tape it off again. And then here I just did go in with a small paintbrush and just cleaned up some of the edges, but I didn't go nuts with it because, like I said, it can't really be perfect due to the nature of this material. So I embraced that, but I did clean up, with a little paintbrush, some of the bad spots that were pretty bad. And then I went in with, once again, with some antique wax, just a little bit. I didn't go too heavy on it, and just wanted to make this look like an older pot that had seen a little bit of life. This pot had experienced some things. And then I wanted to do one little extra touch of some twine around the top, and I took my time with this. This is a thin twine, so I touched it down and then used something to kind of pull up any extra glue that was hanging out while it was still warm, and that made it a little bit easier to get the hot glue up. So just took my time with this, but I only went one time around, but you could easily do the whole top rim if you want. Lots of different ways to do this. And then that was all I did for this DIY. I just put in some boxwood scraps that I had, and I really love how this pot came out. Once again, small enough for a tiered tray, but also big enough to kind of be a filler piece on a shelf. Let's get started with our first DIY here. I've got a sign from the Dollar Tree. I picked one that was kind of a mess because I knew it wouldn't matter. This is from their new, is it Shore Living line, I think is what it's called. But you can see it was not well done, but it's okay. I peeled off what was like majorly coming off, and then we're just going to flip it over and use the back side. But I'm going to use some lightweight spackling to fill in the holes where the hanger was. And once that dries, you just want to sand that down, and then you're good to go. And so I'm going to go in with some Waverly chalk paint in the color white, and I'm going to do like a heavy, I don't know if I could even call it a dry brush, but kind of like a heavy dry brush. I want the board to show through. It's just an MDF, but it'll kind of look like a rustic wood piece this way. And so I'm just going to go in with a lot of white paint, but I'm not going to, get every edge and make it all perfectly even. I'm not going to do a second coat or anything like that. I also want to say that you can cover the other side with like some craft paper or something like that so that it does look complete. I just don't show that in this video. All right, so moving on, I've got this little sign from Dollar Tree in their little Patriotic section, and I'm just taking it apart. We're just going to use the stars for this DIY, and I'm going to sand it down. We're actually going to use the back side mostly. You'll see in just a second, but I wanted to just sand down where the, what am I trying to say, staple holes were. They pulled off the ribbon really easily, but there were just some little holes from the staple. And then as you can see, the paper in the front just actually peeled off pretty easily. So I did peel it off, and I actually think I decided to paint this side because it was such a clean finish. But if it doesn't come off easily for you, you can paint the other side. It doesn't matter. And we're going to do those three paints that you just saw there from Waverly Chalk Paint. We're using white, crimson, and ocean. We're going to be using that throughout all of our DIYs today because they're perfect patriotic colors, but you could use whatever paints you have. Other blues and reds will work as well. We're going to paint each of our stars, each of the colors, red, white, and blue, and I am going to paint the edges as well. If you are new to my channel, welcome. My name is Leanne, and I love sharing budget-friendly DIYs with you. And if you are into that kind of thing, I would love it if you would consider hitting that subscribe button before you leave, and make sure that the notification bell is turned on so you don't miss out on my future videos. Right now, I share videos about once a week with an occasional second video thrown in there. All right, so now that our stars are dry, I didn't want my white to be just a plain white, so I'm going to use this washi tape. Well, it's not called washi tape, but I think it's like washi tape. It is from the Crafter Square section at the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to use it like you would painter's tape, but it's much thinner, and we're going to make some stripes here, and I'm just using a little piece of it in between each one to kind of give me my spacing. And I purposefully did not do this straight up and down across the middle. You'll see, depending on how you look at the star, the stripes might look crooked, but that is on purpose. And then once I have all of our tape on there, I'm going to paint every other white stripe that you can see in red, and then the other ones in blue. So it'll end up being alternating red, white, and blue. And I do let that dry in between coats, but I give it 2 to 3 coats for the saturation of the color that we're looking for. This was my first time using this little tape as like a painter's tape, and I think I'm going to be using it a lot more. I just love the different designs and patterns you can do with it, and because it's narrower than a painter's tape, you just kind of have more options. I know that they sell painter's tape in different widths as well, but this is just so small, and you get quite a bit of it. I think there was like 5 or 6 rolls in it from the Dollar Tree. You could, of course, just use the tape for designs itself and not as a guide to paint, but nonetheless. Once I had all my coats of paint on, I'm peeling off the washi tape, or I'm not sure what I should be calling it, but the tape, and I had really good crisp lines for the most part, And yeah, it was perfect. So now we're just going to kind of distress this with that Waverly Antique Wax, mostly on the white one with the stripes, but I did do it on the edges of all of them. And we're just going to hot glue this onto the sign. Now you could also add like a USA, one letter on each of the stars if you want. I didn't want any words on this. I'm going to kind of use this as a backdrop to one of my displays in my home for my patriotic decor. So I just hot glued them on in a kind of a random pattern, and I love how this one came out. Next up, I have this little sign that I picked up from Hobby Lobby on clearance. I love looking through Hobby Lobby's clearance section, but you could do that at any craft store, any clearance section, anywhere, Dollar General, or just find a sign at the Dollar Tree. They have them in different sizes, and I just sanded it down a little bit, and then we're going to coat the whole thing in Waverly chalk paint in the color white, and that did take about 3 coats, I think. But once that was all dry, we're going to make some stripes with some painter's tape. Now I ended up adjusting this because I didn't want it to be super even, and well, because basically the amount of stripes I wanted to do across weren't gonna quite fit. So then I'm going in with some more of that thin tape as well, and I end up adjusting this a couple of times. You'll see in the end, but you can do even stripes, you can do however you want to do that, but we're going for some red and white stripes because we're doing patriotic DIYs. So once again, giving that a couple of coats, letting it dry in between. And then once I peeled off the tape, that's when I realized that I knew these stripes weren't going to be even, but it just wasn't quite what I wanted. So I went back in and made a few more and painted it again. My DIYs often evolve as they go because I think I have an idea, but I kind of have to see it, and that's the fun of crafting and creating, at least for me, is just kind of being, creative and figuring it out as you go, changing your mind, whatever. So we're going to set that to the side. I picked up this pack of 12 stars from Hobby Lobby, and it was in their it was in their patriotic section. It was $1.99, but that stuff was either 40% off or 50% off. I can't remember. So a great price. So it's not expensive for everything at Hobby Lobby, so definitely check it out. And I'm going to give this star a good coat of the color Ocean. And then we are going to just sand down our little sign here just a little bit. I'm wanting everything to kind of look a little bit more rustic, not like overly rustic, but not perfect, which makes doing DIYs a little bit easier because if you mess up, it's okay. It's not supposed to be perfect anyway. So once I had the star and the sign sanded down, we're going to go in with a little bit of that antique wax. You're going to kind of see a theme here in the DIYs, but it's a themed video. And we're just going to put a little bit of that on the edges and on the sign. You can kind of see I did it across the whole thing. And we're going to use some hot glue and attach this star to the center. Actually, none of the DIYs today have any words on them. I might be doing another patriotic DIY video before the month is out. I'm not sure. But anyways, I love how this came out. This will be perfect. I think I'm going to do a tiered tray for 4th of July. So that's kind of what I have in mind for this. And now I'm taking, for our last one, I'm actually just going to repurpose one of my other old DIYs. I had made this house sign, a double-sided one, and this was using a wood piece from the Dollar Tree, but I also have picked up ones on clearance from Hobby Lobby and whatnot. And we're just going to redo one side of it. So I'm taking off a sticker and then I'm sanding it down. This one was a little bit of a struggle because there was Mod Podge on it from my last project. So I was trying to kind of rough that up and sand that off. And if you had an electric sander, you'd probably do a better job than I did. But then I'm just going to give it a couple coats of white paint. So I'm leaving the other side alone. It's still going to be a double-sided sign, but one will be able to be used for 4th of July. I kind of do patriotic from like Memorial Day to 4th of July, but obviously I made a few since Memorial Day, so these will just be added to my collection. I am once again making some stripes and I taped off the top. So we're just going to do from like the bottom part, kind of like the roof line is where I put the line of painter's tape. Anyways, we're going to give a couple of coats, once again, of the crimson. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. That helps me out so much. So does your interactions on my post by just even liking it. And of course subscribing, but the comments and liking it, all of that kind of engagement on the video, lets YouTube know that you're enjoying what you're seeing. If you watch the whole video, if you let ads play, I'm not saying you have to do all those things, but any of those things really do help me out, and I appreciate all of that. So now I'm just taking these little star stickers. I've had these forever, but you can get these at the Dollar Tree. They come in a big pack. And I'm just going to apply these at the top. Doesn't matter the color because we're going to paint over them. First I tried to do random, and then I realized I didn't like it, so I went back and tried to make them a little bit more in a pattern. You can do that however you want. You could also use your Cricut for something like this. I did have some bleed through on these stickers. They're not perfect. I probably should have used a stencil brush for this part here, but it's okay. I was going for Rustic. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I painted over the stickers with that ocean colored paint once again, and I'm using this little tool from the Dollar Tree. I think it's used for Cricuts, but it's great for other crafting uses. And I'm just peeling off each of the stars, and I also use it to scrape off a little bit of the blue paint that kind of bled through in some of the points of the stars. But like I said, it does not need to be perfect. So once I had all the stickers off, I pulled off the other piece of painter's tape, and once everything was fully dry, I'm going to sand down the edges along with just the surface. Once again, like I did with the other DIYs, just going with the rustic theme, we're going to go over it with a little bit of that antique wax again and making it look a little bit old and weathered and kind of like America. Old, weathered, but still wonderful. And there it is. I love this piece. Again, this is perfect for like a tiered tray. We're going to start with a couple of books, well, 3 to be exact. I did pick these up from the Dollar Tree. If this is hard for you to see or do, then look away. You can also use some from the thrift store. I've done book stacks that you do not tear the books at all. But, you know, if they're at the Dollar Tree and they don't sell there, a lot of these just end up in the landfill. So I'm giving it new life. So we're going to pull off the cover and back and the cover on the spine as much as I can, and you'll see how we finish taking care of that. Now, I've made book stacks before, but here you can see it. We're doing it with some sandpaper. My sanding block had some paint on it, so I just wrapped a fresh piece of sandpaper around it, and we just gently sanded off the spine and just smoothed that out. Now, I've done book stacks before various ways. I've done some where you're just covering them, but recently I saw my friend Kendra on Late Night Creations. I'll link her video. She did a book stack. It was also a Patriotic book stack, and I'm not totally mimicking hers, but I did get some good ideas from her, so I kind of put me in the mood to make another book stack. So we're going to glue these. I was showing you how some of them do not have a blank page. I found that there's more blank pages in the back of the book than the front of the book when you tear off the cover, and so I was just arranging them so that there would be no words shown when we were done. So I'm just using some hot glue to attach these all together. I apologize if I sound sounds different or congested. I am. I don't know what's going on. I guess a summer cold. I don't know. At first I thought it was from lack of sleep, but I don't know. I'm a little nasally sounding, so I apologize. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and put some Mod Podge on the top of this book on the paper. It will wrinkle just a little bit, but that's okay. We're going to come back to it and fix that up. Just make sure you get it all the way to the edges. You want to put a good coat, but don't drench it because the papers are thin and you could tear it. Just make sure you get all of the edges. And then once that dries, we will come back to it. So if you haven't done Mod Podge this way, this is a great way to avoid getting wrinkles. So the Mod Podge is now dry, and we're going to just cut out some paper. I picked this up at Hobby Lobby. I've also got bug bites on my arm. You might see that a few times. I got eaten alive by some bugs. Okay, so we're lining that up. I'm trying really hard to keep it in place because I wanted the pattern to be like, straight up and down. And then we're putting a piece of parchment paper and an iron. You can use a heat press if you have that from like a Cricut or whatever. I just use my iron and make sure there's no steam. And that reactivates the Mod Podge, and we get a really nice smooth finish here. And then I let that cool because the paper was obviously a little bit soft and curling up a little bit initially when it was still warm. once it was fully dry and the Mod Podge was back to being dried down, I just used a sandpaper, my sanding block, and did a gentle away motion to get off the excess paper. And then I'm using these transfers from Dollar Tree. I was deciding between the red, white, and blue and the Star Spangled Banner. I went with Star Spangled Banner. I've gone back and forth on how I feel about these rub-on transfers. I think my last video I was like, oh, I really like these. And then I had trouble with them today. But I made them work. You're just going to scrape them on. These are more of a foil. I don't know if you can see here, the S did not fully transfer and it was like smeared. So I couldn't add it. Anyways, I decided to continue on. I ended up piecing together another just piece from the transfer and filled in the S. I'll show you in a minute. But now I'm going in. I have a mixture of a couple of gray paints. You'll see this. I used it in another DIY, and I'm just dry brushing over this. I started on the pages just to see. I don't know. I wanted to make sure I didn't have too much paint on. You can see one side of the pages had some paint splatter because I left this in my work area while I was doing other stuff and I got paint on it. So I did kind of add on some pieces to the S and smooth that out. And I'm just dry brushing this. I wanted to dull down the gold and just kind of, you know, make it a little bit more rustic. The paper itself was pretty rustic looking. And now I'm just Mod Podging over this. I wanted to seal in the transfers, which isn't always necessary, but these gold foil ones just felt like they needed a seal on them. And then I'm sealing the top too, which normally I do with Mod Podge. I really don't think it was necessary here, but I did it. And then I just took some twine, wrapped it around a couple times, tied it in a knot, added on a bow, and yeah, that is it for the book stack. And I really do like how this came out. I feel like I was able to dull down the gold a little bit, so it still looked rustic, even though it was metallic gold. Anyways, I love this book stack here. For our next one, I'm taking a sign from Hobby Lobby. This sign I'm showing you is I picked up for 99 cents on clearance. So I love to find things on Hobby Lobby clearance that I can do things with. And I wanted to try to pull off this paper. Sometimes I just paint over items. Sometimes I try to take it all off. This is what I did this go around. So I realized that the top layer, I wasn't going to get it all, you know, just peeling it off. So I took a damp paper towel, let it sit, came back to it, and this just softened up the glue. Now this white part here, this was scraping off pretty easy because this was just the under layer. So I left the paper or the wet paper towel on for another couple of rounds, just dampened it and let it sit on the top layer. And then once the top layer came off, I did it again on the bottom layer. And I ended up getting a lot of this off. I'm just using a scraping tool. I don't know. You can decide if this is a worthwhile step for you. I did not get the whole thing totally cleared off. I'm guessing maybe I could have if I had continued going with this process. But I ended up going in with some sandpaper and finishing off to what I thought was good enough in the end. I don't know. It ended up working out great in the end. So you can make your call how you want to handle it. So you can still see there's a good amount there, but it was very, very smooth, so I didn't think I'd have any problems. I did kind of have some problems, but it all ended up getting covered up. So do with that information what you will. We're going to give this 2 coats of Waverly chalk paint in the color white. I am going to do the top and the sides. I don't know if the sides had a paper on it. If it did, I did not take that off. So it all worked out in the end. You know, that's just kind of how I go with my DIYs. If you're new to my channel, I want to say welcome. I love sharing budget-friendly DIYs here on this channel, so I'd love it if you would consider subscribing before you leave. If you can see there, you can see like the paint cracked, and I'm guessing it's from what was underneath, but everything felt smooth, so I just continued on. So I mixed up poured out some of those elephant and silver lining paint is the colors I have from Waverly. And I just was showing you because the background, we're using window clings, and the background had a color and texture to it, and I really wanted it to blend in. So I started out very minimal with the silver lining, pulling out, I think, a hair from my chippy brush, and I'm just I went light and then I layered. I ended up going pretty dark and pretty heavy, but I just wasn't sure. So I just kind of wanted to do a little bit at a time, and if I got it too dark in a spot, I went back with the light paint, and I just kind of kept going back and forth until I had what I liked. You could just do a solid color too if you don't care about the edges of the window cling. I don't think it would look horrible, but I don't know. This is just kind of what I went with. Plus, the colors of the window cling were more muted, so I was going for a little bit of a darker look. And you see, I mixed some Waverly Chalk Paint in the color Ocean with some burnt umber because, again, I was going for a little bit more muted rustic color to match the window clings. And I taped off the front, and I decided I wanted to paint all of the edges with the blue. And when that dried, I took this stencil, which is from Hobby Lobby, and we're going to stencil on some white stars. I decided that it would go best if I didn't try to do like a straight line across. I thought I might struggle with that. So I just did the smaller stars, and I did random patterns all the way across, and I did this on all 4 of the sides, and I thought it added a nice added touch around, just around the perimeter. You'll see that in the end. And now I'm using some Mod Podge to put our window clings. We're going to do this big truck window cling, and then I add on a few other pieces from it, some smaller pieces. And I'm just doing a thin layer of Mod Podge on the back. Portions of this, I do it on the piece itself. And then I just slowly, you have a little bit of wiggle room time here. I'm sliding it down, but you want to push out all of the air bubbles and then let it get tacky and a little bit dry before you Mod Podge over top. Otherwise, the window cling just continues to move around. Here, I tried doing it more on the back, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to put it on the sign itself. And I just worked my way across, and then here I am adding on a couple little rockets and a couple stars. I just let my hands get messy and did it this way. And then once that's all done and everything's kind of set in place, I do Mod Podge over the whole thing. That helps hold it down, but it also helps kind of make the different textures blend in and hopefully not look like a window cling by going over the whole thing. I'm using Mod Podge in the matte finish. I'm sorry, guys, I don't feel 100%. I guess this is like a summer cold or something. I don't know. I did Mod Podge the edges too, just so that the paint wouldn't chip off when I was setting on a shelf or something. But I really love how this came out. I thought it was really cute. It's, like I said, it's a little bit darker, not as bright of a colors, but I was trying to match the tone of the window clings, and I love the little star perimeter. So, love that one as well. All right, I'm breaking out my miter box and I got this for Christmas, and I hadn't used it yet, and I'm finally using it. I was kind of intimidated. I didn't need to be. I'm showing you how the edge had a little bit of a lip that helps hold it still on the table. Here I'm showing you this in real time. It didn't take long, but I was kind of getting a feel for it, and we're going to cut down a dowel rod into 3 different sizes. I didn't measure them, I just made sure that they were different sizes, but that didn't take too long. That was like real time there. Still kind of getting used to getting my saw in and out of it, but you can see I got a pretty clean cut. We did smooth this out with our sandpaper, and my first cut was definitely the roughest, but used my sanding block once again to just smooth out those edges. And then this is the ocean with the burnt umber. We're going to use that blue throughout, and I'm just going to paint the dowel rods in different colors. We're making little tiny like firecrackers. And I'm going to use crimson. I could have dulled this one down with some brown paint too. That might have been a good idea, but I go over it and kind of dry brush at the end anyway. And I use my heat gun just to dry it so that I can use the, hold the other end and do the other side. But I'm going to do red, white, and blue. I don't show you the white because you guys know how to paint. So, but I did want to show you, that's how I did it. If you don't have a heat gun or a hair dryer, just set it down, and when it dries, come back to it. But I was using my heat gun. On the white one, I took this little firecracker, firework, rocket, I don't know, off of the gold transfers and applied that one. And I thought that was a kind of a nice little addition. And we're going to Mod Podge all of these, once again, just to kind of seal the paint in so that it doesn't, chip off when you're doing stuff with it. I don't know. And now I'm using my chippy brush and some burnt umber. I got a little heavy on the red heavier than I planned to, but I just kind of smeared it with my hands. And, sometimes I do this a little bit more proper, and sometimes you just kind of go with it. Did that on all of them. And now, so I wanted to poke a hole in. I don't have a little hand drill, So here's a way to do it without power tools. I'm just using my tiny scissors, um, and I'm poking a hole in. I don't need it super deep. And when I opened, I was going to use some jute twine that's wired, um, but I had this, I think it's called berry garland from Dollar Tree, and I was like, oh, that would kind of work good. Like I took off the berries, but anyways, it was unraveling a little bit, so I used some hot glue and just used my finger protectors to kind of smooth that down. And we're gonna make this our little, is it called the wick? I don't know what it's called on the firecracker. But we're gonna use this. So put a little dab of hot glue in the hole and kind of wedge that in there. And it's got the wire, so it's gonna keep the shape. And I just kind of twisted it and bent it. And then at this point, I cleaned up all my paintbrushes, but I had a little bit of paint still sitting there. So I used a paper towel and just brushed on the burnt umber on the wick just to kind of cover up any of the hot glue and just, I don't know, make it look better to me. And then I hot glued the three together and took a little bit of twine wrapping around it. And I think this is really cute. I've seen an idea out there somewhere and I'd been wanting to make this, but I was intimidated to use my saw. I'm glad I used it. It wasn't difficult at all. And this is going to be a really cute addition to my tiered tray. I've seen these little things made all sorts of shapes and sizes, but I thought using the dowel rod was a nice way to make a mini one for the tiered tray. Next up, I have this palette sign. So this is just one of those palettes from the Dollar Tree. I've already taped it off. We're going to make a simple flag. This isn't not complicated, but I'm going to use crimson for our red stripes, and then we will paint the other ones just with some white. My head keeps getting in the way, which causes it to come out of focus. I did want to also add, if you are enjoying this video, please give it a thumbs up. It's a simple way to help support me, and yeah, lets YouTube know that you're digging what I'm doing, lets me know that you're digging what I'm doing, and the likes and the comments make YouTube more likely to share my video with others because they think if you're enjoying it, that other people might as well. So here I am doing the white stripe as well. Let me know down in the comments. Oh, real quick, I took a wood star from this was a Hobby Lobby pack for painting that white as well. Let me know down in the comments if you decorate for 4th of July, or I like to do my patriotic stuff through all of summer, but I'm just curious, or do you not decorate with any red, white, and blue at all? Okay, so now I'm going in with more of that blue paint mixture that I had made, and we're going to paint the top part here. And then I wanted to sand it down, and it was dry at this point, but I somehow got like a white scuff on the blue. But we're going to rough it up a little bit with our sandpaper, and then I did just put on some more blue paint. You can see it's kind of wet there. I'm just touching that spot up. And we're going to go in with the chippy brush with a little bit of that burnt umber. I didn't want the stark brightness. I wanted all of my DIYs to kind of go together so I could feel free to use them together if I needed to. And then I was like, okay, I need to speed up drying that little spot so I could add some more of the brown paint. And then we're just hot gluing our star on here. And that is all for this DIY. Very simple. Once again, would be great in a tier tray, but would also be kind of great in a little collection, in a little display. Those are the words I'm looking for. Guys, sorry for my voice, sorry for my brain fog today, but I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, guys.
Hey, thanks for watching, everybody. Be sure to like and subscribe, and she'll see you in the next one.